brightly.
So how much space do you have allocated for this workbench you were talking about?
I mean, it's not it's not a lot. I probably got I'd say 6 foot, 8 foot run where I want to get this like nice and situated, get a good like vice grip on there and like a pegboard behind it. Just a good man station where all the work happens.
An 8 foot run, that's significant.
I mean, I think it's pretty good. I don't know. But like every other like wall of the garage has like shelves and storage solutions. So this is the only like little nook. So I'll take it. I'll take it. Do you have like this workbench situation already set up, or is this
Nope. Nope. I find like a chair, like the back of the top of the back of a chair and like a corresponding rung on a ladder to make as like a makeshift sawhorse, and I'll like put my wood across that, and that's what I'll use to. It's not good. It's definitely not.
It passes all the OSHA regulations.
Yeah, actually, what I do oftentimes is more often than not, that's unfortunate when I'm in that scenario. More often than not, I'll just like have something heavy sitting on whatever I'm like cutting or working on the end in the bed of my truck, and then I'll just pull out the area that I'm drilling into or cutting so that it's yeah. The fact that that's the better scenario is like.
So in the next webinar, Wes will be covering do's and don'ts of home renovation safety.
Yeah. Make sure that you don't accidentally cut into the bed of your truck with your circular saw because you don't have an appropriate workstation.
Yes, on the next series. But for today, hopefully everyone's in the right place. We're just a few minutes ahead of start time for Unlock the Power of the TheWorxHub and get ahead of the competition. So
I feel like in addition to the thumbs up and like high five controls here in Zoom, I feel like they need to have a slowly shaking your head reaction option.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Hopefully if that chat thing's working, go ahead and drop in. What projects are you working on? What unsafe work practices are you doing at your home?
Ed says it is. Good.
We will not put those unsafe practices in writing.
We will not.
So I had this little story during the do-you sessions that we were doing. But I got an opportunity to play around with some electrical, hanging some fixtures and stuff. Thankfully that worked out great. Because it's behind me, because I don't have any more left to do. But we hung up some string lights in our little back patio the other day, and what's funny about that is you never even think about this, but like, how do you set up a permanent installation where you can control that from a switch? Because of my experiences messing around with the electrical, I actually feel like I have a pretty good idea how to do this. So that's like my next project I'm really excited about. Basically run some conduit on the outside of my house and run it down to an outdoor switch that we have, and one of the switches isn't connected to anything, so it's kind of a perfect setup for me. But lo and behold, who would think that this guy would be excited about messing around with electrical again?
That's usually where I hightail it and ask like my father-in-law to get involved if it's because he's an electrician. So I'm like, hey, before I just electrocute myself or burn the house down, you think you want to take a look at this and see if I've goofed this up? So far so good.
Don't forget to turn the power off. Just gonna step one.
Now,
rule number one. Rule number two is before you disconnect anything, take a picture of how it was connected beforehand, so that you can unscrew it up after you screw it up inevitably.
That's the next maintenance app is going to be actually creating a diagram of what your breaker box looked like. pre-switching.
What is it? You threw it out to the last session and and you're like, "What? Did anyone have any advice on what I should do?" And one of the clients just goes, "Hire an electrician."
Cheaper, probably.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're at about time, aren't we, guys? I might have to actually cover some stuff today.
Well, hopefully we've got a good list of interesting and compelling stories for you guys today. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Sure.
All right, let's go ahead and kick things off since we're at the top of the hour. Thanks everybody so much for joining us today for our session on unlocking the power of the WorxHub and getting ahead of the competition. My name is Katie Ross, and I'm a member of the marketing team here at Dude Solutions, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. We have a great presentation lined up for you, but before we get started, just wanted to cover off a couple of housekeeping items. So first off, the session today is in listen only mode, but we'd love to hear from you and answer your questions. So throughout the session, feel free to utilize that or Zoom Q&A feature along the bottom of the Zoom platform. My colleague Taylor First and I will be monitoring questions throughout the session, and we'll also have time available at the end to present some of those questions to our presenters. We'll also be utilizing the poll feature in the session a few times, so that'll help us frame our discussion today, and we encourage you to participate. So when that poll prompts up, please go ahead and use that feature. That'd be great. And last but not least, I wanted to let you know that the webinar today will be recorded, and you'll receive an email tomorrow with a copy of the recording as well as some additional resources. So let's get this session started. We have two rock star presenters lined up here from Dude Solutions. First, I wanted to introduce you to Wes Jamison. He's an enterprise account executive and has been with the Dude for 6 years. In that time, he's consulted with hundreds of senior living organizations in adopting and expanding the WorxHub suite of tools that are designed to help streamline operations. And Wes is joined by Patrick Tierney, who is an enterprise solutions consultant and conducts product demonstrations for clients, consultations with partners, researches product ideas and needs, and moderates online professional development seminars on a variety of operational management topics. He has 7 years of experience with the WorxHub team. So you're in great hands today to learn more about unlocking the power of the WorxHub and getting ahead of the competition. So without further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Wes and Patrick.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Well, I appreciate it. Yeah. And so we'll get started on a slide today that'll probably be pretty familiar to a lot of you. This is what we affectionately refer to as the WorxHub wheel. And this will help us set the stage for what we've chosen to highlight today and why before we get into some of those features and modules. But yeah, appreciate y'all joining us. Keeping it light and loose today. So if you have questions about any of the stuff that we're covering, make sure you put that stuff in the chat box. Please, we encourage you, as Katie mentioned, to get into those poll questions. We've got some interesting questions that I'm genuinely interested to see y'all's feedback on as they relate to these 4 different pieces that we're going to cover today. So, the point of today's webinar is to talk about 4 aspects of the WorxHub that are outside of the main facilities piece that have been showing us over the past couple of years that they're really unique and they add a lot of value to the organization in a way that's a little bit unorthodox as far as how people usually perceive the WorxHub software. And so, the idea is that we're going to get into the housekeeping module, the QA survey or auditing and inspections module, the room bookings and event management module, because the thing that really ties these 3 together in the way that they're unique and adding kind of unique value to the whole suite is that, we're introducing other departments into WorxHub usage. So the more folks that are in the WorxHub that are using it, the more engagement we're getting, the more tickets that we're getting through this central system, and the better it works for everybody. But aside from that, this is really helping folks streamline their operations, get more efficient in their operations, find some areas where they can save in costs. In many cases, find areas where they can add additional revenue streams, while all at the same time, all encompassing, they are providing a better service for the residents. So those are the three modules that we're going to cover, and the resident portal integration that many of you are using is where we're going to get started off talking about today once we get into it, because of how valuable it's been over the past few years in really increasing transparency and communication. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Pat, would you mind jumping back to the WorxHub wheel slide for just a second? So those are the four things we're going to cover today. That is generally what connects them all. But if we're going to even take it a step higher, I think the overall idea is that, especially now more than ever, we're, as communities, are looking to get creative, shake things up a little bit, figure out new ways to run these departments, new ways to do things where we can do a lot of the things that I mentioned, save money, find additional revenue streams while we're all providing a better service at the same time. More often than not, the best way to do this is through leveraging technology. The other benefit of leveraging technology is that I think that we all know that the new generation of retirees that's going to be moving into our communities is demanding this type of technology. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that in many cases, this is making your communities more marketable. When you can tell your prospective residents things like, you can expect your status delivery or service delivery notifications, the statuses of the things that you're requesting in your fingertips in real time. That type of message, I think, gives residents and prospective residents a lot more confidence in the community that they're about to sign into. But yeah, Pat, what do you think? I hate to steal the stage here, talking about marketability, talking about what this means to the folks that live in the communities, as far as technology and leveraging technology to make their lives better. Do any stories come to you or come to mind that you've heard recently that kind of play to this? What do you think?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I would say over the last year, it's definitely been eye-opening. I think it was starting to trend that way even before 2020, and then it's just taken off, and kind of that demand from residents for that technology. And then even, it was funny, even as late as this morning, we had this call with these folks out in California, and our questions are usually the same, like, hey, what has you interested in looking at, bringing in some technology? And their number one answer was, our residents are asking for it, right? Like they were using one of these resident portals, and one of the residents actually brought it to them. And they're like, I want to be able to enter in this request and have you guys to get that service request on your side. And that was the number one thing. It wasn't like we want to manage assets better or, run better reports. It was the singular piece of integrating in with the residents, kind of meeting them where they're at, and being able to just better communicate with them. And we kind of remember, we laughed about it. It was like the residents, all things equal, if you're able to communicate with them or over communicate with them, they'll be much more forgiving, right? Like if you're sending them sort of updates and emails and things like that, even if the job isn't done, right off the bat, lickety split, that it would be much easier they'd be much more forgiving.
That's right. Yeah. It's interesting. I think it's totally 100%. As a society, this is a silly anecdote, but it might, have some relevance here. I think we're conditioning ourselves to be a lot more demanding of hyper transparent communication. You think about Amazon as a great example. When you get your order notification in your inbox, how many times do you click to see, if it's shipped in that order status? I know I'm going to get an email from UPS when it has shipped, but I still need to check and see, because, this is pretty important. I need to know what's going on with my stuff, what's up with my stuff. to the point that, once UPS is out for delivery, you can actually follow the UPS truck all around your town until they get to your house with your stuff. And, so I think that we expect a lot of this transparency now just as a society. And the idea is, that's what all of these modules are in the WorxHub were purpose built to do, to make sure that people are in the loop. And that's a really good segue. Let's move into the first aspect of the resident engagement application integration that we have. So it's not a standalone module like the other three that we're going to cover today, but its importance in this communication and transparency, made it really necessary to cover today. So we got a really interesting stat that I think plays to this theme that we've been talking about in the communication and the demand for technology from the residents. These are some pretty neat numbers. We've run these numbers over the past years. They really started to get significant in 2018. Lo and behold, the next year it doubles. Lo and behold, 2020, it almost doubles. But 81,000 work requests last year came from our ability to integrate with a resident engagement app. And actually, Pat, if you could flip over to the next, just in case, just to add a little bit more clarity to what we're talking about, these are the companies currently that we integrate with. There may be others out there, and it's more than likely that we can integrate with them. It's just a matter of having a conversation. But, we've been specifically approached by clients who want us to integrate with these companies. So this is, the current status. But basically a resident, is accessing their calendar, accessing their menus, accessing their resident directory, so on and so forth. And in the same place, they can access a service delivery and then get that status notification right back, to the palm of their hand when they're on this. So probably a poll question just popped up. I'd be really curious to know if y'all are using a resident engagement app at your campus. Yes, no, planning on it, maybe so. Let us know, and we'll post these results. Once given a couple minutes, once we got enough answers there. So all that to say, that's what the connection does. It allows a resident to be able to submit a ticket from one of these devices, which they're spending so much of their time in throughout the day as it is, get it over to the WorxHub so that service delivery, whether it's facilities or housekeeping or what have you, can be worked in the WorxHub while the status notification goes back to the resident in that app that they're already spending so much time in. Thus the communication and transparency. So it looks like it's an even split. About 36% of folks are using a resident engagement app, 36 are not, and about 28% are planning on it. So almost 36, 30 in a way. So if we go back to that original slide that shows the number of requests that we've gotten through this feature, this is what really blows my mind. So 81,000 work requests coming through this integration is in and of itself, I think, extremely impressive and showing kind of the changing times and this hockey stick type growth that we're seeing in the adoption of this technology. Here's the really crazy part. This is only representative of 15% of our client base. So we work with about 1,300 senior living organizations. Only 200 of those organizations are actually using that integration. So 200 organizations, out of those 200 organizations last year, 81,000 work requests came from residents using their engagement app, integrating with the WorxHub. So I can only imagine what the next year's numbers are going to look like, but I think it's pretty clear to say that this is a trend that's not going away.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Like, it's not like it's going to revert. I was just talking to one of our coworkers, and her mom is in a senior living community, and she's like, this day and age, like, they're not picking up the phone, they're not calling. She's like, if my mom has an issue, she goes into her portal and puts it in, right? Like, they're more used to it, they're more comfortable with it, and it's not going back to the way it was. So you might as well embrace it, give them the tech, and support ways to be able to go back and forth with them.
That's right. That's right. Well, cool. Well, we appreciate y'all answering the poll and then giving us some additional context into which one of these partners you guys are using. Yeah, this has been a really exciting thing that we've gotten into the last few years, and it's been even more exciting to see how well adopted it's become and how well it's grown. Such a valuable thing for an organization to have that communication in the residents' fingertips in real time. So one of the other trends we're noticing, and I think a good transition into our first module that we're going to cover. What do you think, Pat? Did I skip anything on this? Is there anything else that's
the only quick thing I was going to add? Saw some of the responses come through on chats and the questions. I think just about all the ones that were mentioned with Vibrant and K4, you can see them up on screen. If there's ones that we haven't mentioned or aren't up, shoot us a message. Honestly, the way that this it's API, it's basically a way that we can have the two software programs to communicate. Is pretty universal, meaning if there's other ones that are out there, it usually isn't that difficult. I say it's not me creating the software, but it's not that difficult to make those connections. So if you don't see it, don't be discouraged. Odds are we can probably make that connection with that program.
That's right.
Yeah, but no, other than that, hopefully that's one of those ones that people can expect to see here before too long. So, but yeah, I think that kind of can take us along to kind of some of the next piece that we were going to talk about, which was housekeeping, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And one of the really interesting things that I think made housekeeping really necessary to talk about today, going on with the trends that we're seeing, especially the trends that we're seeing as they relate to what our residents are going to be demanding and expecting, is greater choice, a more tailored experience. Something that really speaks to a bespoke nature, and so we've heard stories a lot recently about how some communities are choosing to really increase the amount of ad hoc housekeeping services that they're doing. The traditional model of housekeeping, I think, is pretty, it's pretty rigid, it's pretty structured, it's very scheduled. We follow along with the residents' initial service agreement when they moved in, that we're going to be here X number of times per month for X number of minutes each showing. And I think one of the really neat stories that we're hearing is that, especially some of the newer residents that are moving in, are more interested in a little bit more flexibility in that schedule. And so I can feel the head shaking and head scratching in the audience. The number one thing that we hear with housekeeping, as far as challenges goes, is really just managing schedules. Especially with the story about a last minute call out. If we have a last minute call out and we have to shuffle around all this work that person had assigned to them, that type of a process can really be a nightmare. It can really eat up time. And, at the end of the day, we got to make sure that nothing slipped through the cracks, right? So the idea of offering more flexibility when it's not like a last minute call out probably sounds like a nightmare. If you don't have a really good digital way to manage that stuff. And so the feature that we're going to highlight with housekeeping and as it relates to this, and our ability to allow people a lot more flexibility and a lot more choice, in the services that are being delivered to them, are really through this greater ability to manage a complicated schedule. And so we're going to jump into that feature a little bit, show a little bit of software. And as we're looking at that, we'll jump back into another big point that makes housekeeping something that's valuable to talk about, in how, folks are using it to kind of shake things up a little bit. When we're doing this, and we're doing a lot of ad hoc work and a lot of kind of more tailored, resident choice work, that's a really great opportunity for fee for service. So we're going to show how our system helps facilitate that process as well.
Yeah. let's jump to that. So I'll bring some life to some of these, but if you really only use the maintenance module, the housekeeping would be sort of split out into a completely separate application. But let me hit on some of these pieces where essentially you'd be able to set up a really tailored experience for these residents and have them, you know, inject some of like the personal parts in there that otherwise might be lost. I've seen some of these scenarios where housekeepers have this stuff in like little black books and or just basically in their head, and they're going to go perfectly take care of this resident, but the question becomes what happens when that housekeeper has to move on to another opportunity or switch shifts or things like that. We want to make sure that we're meeting the resident where they're at. So if you can see my screen now, I've got this set up that here are all the jobs for today outlined with the times, the residents, and if I'll click into one of these samples, it's going to house a lot of that great information that we want to make sure is in a very central place, right? To include very specific steps and procedures based on what the resident has kind of asked about, right? We're going to do high dust, low dust, obviously, but maybe that resident says, hey, I've got a little cat. Can you empty out the kitty litter box? It seems small, but it can make a lot of difference to someone that's getting those services, right? And you can see there's kind of like a little symbol here for the $sign. You could still bill for that and say, we're going to do a couple extra things, but there might be sort of a fee associated to it, right? And really sort of keen specific notes on, hey, you want to make sure and take your shoes off, or don't touch the trophies or the china. Those are really valuable notes that will make a world of difference for the resident side. And I think it was a couple years ago, back when we used to have like user conferences in person, and one of the housekeepers was there, and she showed me the sample of like this spreadsheet. I think I probably talked about it with US, but she had this gigantic sheet, and she's like, "Yep, I just basically redo this every day, and just kind of keep flipping it every week." And then she sort of got into some of this stuff, and I was showing her the software, and she's like, "Oh my God, like this would keep everything, and then this just automates?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "That would save me hours." So it's things like that that a lot of people are tracking, but we want to kind of maybe save some time and keep some of this great information in a central place, right? So things like this, you can set up and say, we want to do once a week, once a month, your bi-weeklies, your deep cleans, all that stuff can stay stored here. But Wes kind of alluded to it. What happens when there's changes that have to get made? That was something that we wanted to address kind of right up front on this. So a little bit more flexibility with the calendar on this module, because there are and there will always be instances where someone's going to call out sick or not going to be there to perform everything. So in those cases, we got to sort of swap things around. This is where you could leverage something like like a calendar to be able to pull this up and make some shifts, make some changes. So I'll pull up a few folks here, and you can see if as their names show up across the top, if they've got stuff already on schedule, fine. But when they call out and they say, I can't be here for the morning, then we've got to, reassign this maybe to like one of your floaters or one of your custodians that's, got some flexibility. They're doing common areas, but they could also fit in one of these unit cleans. In those cases, yeah, just drag it and drop it. And then you could move it right over to someone else's calendar. So there's no interruption of service, right? Like that resident, is still going to get that service at 9 o'clock, and all the detailed steps and procedures are there for the next housekeeper to take it and not lose any sort of steam or lose anything as far as the delivery there. So.
And I think, and I'm one of these people too, hyper visual person. I think seeing it in a display like this, being able to actually see gaps in schedules really is what is helping facilitate some of this extra stuff that, is a little bit less regimented and scheduled than what we're additionally used to. So this is the kind of thing, that allows us to explore maybe providing housekeeping in a different way than we used to, with the end result being a better service that the resident appreciates more. So when one of the poll questions that I'm curious we're going to pop this one up here in a second, is a lot of what I'm alluding to is something that the industry is considering, a lot of communities are considering, like a membership level type of service agreement. Switching over to something that's like maybe a tiered kind of leveled type of service agreement where, you know, at the very top is maybe gold status and you've got XYZ and everything else after that is fee for service. This is something I've been hearing a lot about recently. I'd be really curious out of the audience who's gotten word that this is something that leadership is considering, or you guys have been talking about. So that poll's up there. Let us know what you think. I'd be really curious to see what these results are. But if so, if this is something that you're doing, and then therefore a much less structured schedule is going to be in place, then, you know, something like this is what's really going to help you manage that and make sure that everything goes off without a hitch. Yeah, so 15% of you guys already have one of those in place. 15% are considering it, 70% are not.
Yeah. I think I remember feeling a little surprised on this initially when it was explained to me, like they would rather raise their hands and say, I want a service on this date or this time, than being told this is your slot that's just going to keep recurring. And then it was explained to me, I was like, that kind of actually makes sense. They want a little, it's just like with anything, you want a little more freedom, a little more choice. So hopefully the software would allow you to either, you know, not have to be locked into one way, but be flexible depending on the needs of your community.
Yeah. And so, you know, many of you are already doing it, billing for additional services. Housekeeping is already presently with the model that we're running today. Is one of the biggest areas of additional fee for service, something like a carpet cleaning. I've got my family coming in town this weekend and I need an extra cleaning before they come, so on and so forth. If, you know, you're looking at new models of housekeeping or expanding those service offerings, our software is really, really well positioned to help facilitate additional billable items, to make it easy so we know what all the costs are. All that's super transparent. We can make sure that we assign the right cost, that there's no hiccups there. We've got multiple areas where people can, different staff members can have various levels of oversight to ensure that the right costs have been assigned to the right type of work. We can get residents to sign off on additional billable work. All of this stuff is in place to make switching over to a process like this a lot more streamlined.
Yeah. We'd done some studies not too long ago where, you know, sites that were doing this well were able to recoup, you know, 30%, 40% more, like as far as the revenue goes year over year, just by having a system in place, right? Like if you're doing like, you know, carbon copies or paper slips, there's a chance you're going to miss some of that stuff. But by having it in the TheWorxHub, greatly increase the chance that you're actually going to get all that revenue that you should be getting, and just finding slick ways to export this out into some partner programs, without this again being a multi-step process. It's market as billable, confirm the rates, and then send it over to one of these programs. So really can make this a nice clean throughput here.
You'll have to excuse us. You know, it's a little bit of proof that we've been around for a long time, but we do have some legacy software names. Although if you click that name, it'll still be able to export to the organization that now owns that software.
There you go.
So yeah, funny little add-on there. But yeah, so that's housekeeping. So those are some of the reasons that we thought it was really valuable to touch on this today. Hopefully you think so as well. A good segue into the next module is the QA and Survey app. The QA and Survey app was initially built to go behind housekeeping. So the first couple things that we're going to talk about and we're going to show with QA and Survey is how you can audit those services that we're providing, especially in the case that we're maybe trying a new service level. We're trying to shake things up a little bit. We want to get some real-time feedback on these things that we're doing. This is the best way to do it. Trending deficiencies, being able to find and see exactly where we're not scoring as high as we need to, and then using those deficiencies for more directed in-services with our team members. It makes the entire process so much more streamlined. After we talk about that, as it relates to housekeeping, we're going to jump back into what I consider versatility. The versatility of this module, I think, is really, really exceptional. This module in particular, we've seen more departments introduced into the TheWorxHub through their use of this module than you would even think of. People like dining services, the kitchen staff, people like sales and marketing, you know, other departments are getting into the TheWorxHub because of really how much of an wide open canvas this thing can be in a number of different ways. So we're going to talk about that after we look at how we follow up with the services that we're delivering on campus and what we can do with that information.
Yeah. Really a big fan of this. It's been fun to see the evolution of how it kind of really just started with standard use case of QA behind housekeepers, and how it's really evolved as people either got more creative with it on their own, or we had some ideas as well. So, but let me go with the basic use case, which again, for anyone, whenever I'm like, how are you doing QA? There's usually like a pause and they're like, well, you know, we're doing some QA. You know, it's for most people, it's a paper process. It's clipboards. It's stuff that is labor intensive. So our thought was just roll it right into the software, and then be able to complete these surveys and inspections from a mobile device. So if I think about, you know, getting automated reminders, hey, these 3 units are ready for inspection, or these common areas are ready for inspection, go to there with your device, and then access these surveys right from your device. You can handle this from smartphones or tablets. You can customize all of the questions that would be in there. And in best cases, this is going to be checkpoints that mirror what the task list was on the schedule, right? So if I ask for high dusting, low dusting, and furniture cleans, my QA will look very similar, but I'm just more so confirming, did they do all those things? And in doing so, you're putting it right in the program. There's no intermediary steps. Wes doesn't sit there with a stack of papers entering these into a spreadsheet. It's just going all in one fell swoop. Right. So you can speed up this process, because I think what a lot of sites are saying is we want to get to the report on this. Right. So it's basically like, I'm doing all these QAs. I'm doing this because the throughput should be, what do I get out of this, and what actionable info can I get? If you do it in the software, it's got built-in reporting to get you that much closer. So you could run a report and say, I've done 10 QAs. If I poll every question, what are the ones that my team are doing really well in? And what are the ones that we're maybe not doing so well? Right. So yeah, go ahead, Wes.
Great segue to our poll question. In fact, I think it covers exactly this. Curious to see how many of y'all in the audience are currently QAing your housekeeping work.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a lot of work in many cases. It's valuable information to have, and it's a worthwhile endeavor. It's just, how can you do it and still get to all the other, you know, timely items and work responsibilities that are normally on your plate.
That's right. Yeah, I think Pat brought up a really good point too, that alludes to the flexibility and the versatility of this module as a whole. Think about the number of departments that you have in your community. I would argue to say that every department has some sort of internal audit that they run, right? And you look at that process, and you think about it. That process, you go out into the field with a clipboard, you check items, you fill them or you pass them on your clipboard, or however, and then you take those results and you sit back in your email inbox and you start to fire off your corrective action, right, as per those results. And that's just so clunky. I would think that with a system that automates that corrective action and that feedback loop, and ensuring that all of these teams that have the corrective action they need to based on the efficiencies that you found, there's so many more places that we would like to run an audit, but currently the process is prohibitive. It's too long. Once I fire off those emails to my staff members on these things that I found that they need to do, how do I keep up with this stuff now? How do I even follow up with all that? I have to remember. And so, yeah, that's part of what makes this module so powerful, in my opinion. Not just that it automates all of that stuff, but the fact that you can do this with kitchen cleanings. You can do this with, an executive director, like walkthrough inspection of the community. You can do this with, we heard the story about print marketing material. Sales and marketing wanted to make sure that their print marketing material, was in the proper amount of fulfillment in each one of the different stations around campus. So we'll make it a survey. And when it's not, lo and behold, we'll click that fail button, and the system, because we built it to, will pop up a window that says, would you like to assign a corrective action to a person or to a team? So that you're ensuring that everything's being followed up with. But yeah, just making this process a lot easier. So yeah, and Pat's got a really good list here of just kind of stories that we've heard, surveys that we've built out in the system based on stories like a mock fire, life safety, executive director walkthrough. We even released a couple last year to any one of our clients that owned this module. Last year during the pandemic, we released a couple, right? Pat, do you remember that?
We did. It's something we've been asked about because there's so many great examples of, what are other sites using? And we've got the ability, it's obviously a cloud-based system, to go through and actually publish some of those if it feels like it would serve kind of the greater WorxHub community. So yeah, if you didn't catch it, you can actually access it through, if you're running the QA app, as part of one of the templates here. If you go to add it, it'll say, hey, do you want to use one of these pre-published ones? So we had some checklists that we worked with, obviously some of the CMS resources that were out there, and we published them. So I think it's an example of what we can do and what we're going to continue to do as we get really good templates. And, hopefully a client or two will sign off on theirs and go, yeah, have at it, and then that's something that, again, will serve the larger, WorxHub team.
Yeah.
I love some of the creative examples that we've seen, for sure. The executive director walkthrough, the fresh eye inspections. We had talked to someone that had this really thought out kitchen inspection, going through and looking at all the appliances and all of the the kitchen hood and everything else, and I was like, that's brilliant.
I mean, just think about the frequency that any given community has to run that inspection constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So I see a lot of value with this. I missed it. I wonder, Katie, could you pop back up the results of the poll question? Because I think I kind of bulldozed right through it with my little monologue there. Okay, cool. Do you currently QA the quality of your housekeeping work? 36% is yes, 55% is no, 9% is I wouldn't know where to start. So
yeah, definitely one of those ones. It's again, it's time consuming and it's tough. So
yeah,
use tools to make it go faster where possible.
So we're at 138. Let's keep rolling into the next module. Yeah, so the room bookings module is one that I love to talk about because of how valuable it can be, and because of the weight and the gravity that these very large, complex marketing events have for the future of our community, right? Hopefully, we're thinking about, some of us are already there. If our, organizations are already at 100% inoculation, we're thinking about bringing some of this stuff back. We're kind of maybe doing a soft start with some internal events. The hope is that one day we're going to bring these big marketing events back. Some of these external events, maybe something like a Rotary luncheon or something like that. I know that's a specific story I've heard from a client. We're going to bring that stuff back, and that's a minimum coordination of 5 different departments. I think a minimum, right? Maybe 4, but really 4 to 6. We're talking about maintenance, who has to go in and set up the room in a particular setup with a certain number of tables, a certain number of chairs, and because we have this whole schematic of how the room needs to be set up, we know that it's going to take a certain amount of time. So we have to start 45 minutes before the beginning of this event. So we have to make sure that event isn't bookended by another event that ends too close to that 45-minute mark that we don't have enough time to actually set it up. You know, reciprocally, housekeeping at the end of that has to break it down. And we know that's going to take a certain amount of time. So we need to make sure those blocks are there so we don't have any kind of mishaps with the actual usage of that space. Oftentimes we're going to use catering. You know, we need a certain display of coffee and donuts and tea for a certain amount of people. And if it's an internal event, that's going to have one cost. If it's an external event, that's going to have another cost. So all that stuff needs to be planned. We need to know when to bring that stuff, how much, where to set it up at, and at the very end of the day, who are we charging for it and how much. And then additionally, maybe IT, we need some audio visual equipment to play a slideshow or some music in the background or something. And so that all has its marching orders as well. So you think about the amount of coordination, you know, revolved around an event like this, and the gravity that they have for how your community's, you know, operationally perceived by future residents. We need to make sure that these things go off without a hitch. We really got to put the best foot forward. And so because of those reasons, I love talking about it, because it manages all those things very, very well. So at this point, I want to pop up the poll question, because it digs into that, how people are currently doing this. Are you currently keeping track of your events? Outlook, that's probably the most common thing that we hear. Are you currently using room bookings? If so, we'd love to see some feedback on that and maybe the chat on how that's working for you. Or another common scenario, someone in my marketing department knows everything. So that's how that works.
Yeah. What a solid system. Right.
Yeah.
I want to say it was yesterday, Wes. We had I feel like they were from Arizona. It was on the West Coast, but we had that team on. They owned the maintenance module, but they had the maintenance director on, and then the events coordinator and someone from Resident Life. And their biggest thing was, he's like, I don't always get communicated to. He goes, I'm supposed to do setup and breakdown of this event. He said the other day he had three maintenance tickets that were requested for setup for the same event, and they didn't even have all the same information. So he's left holding his hands up saying, what am I supposed to do with that? Right. Yeah. I don't know that that's all that uncommon, you know, just trying to get all those little pieces to work in one sort of orderly fashion.
Yeah. And if you think about it, you know, the most common scenario that people are managing this by is Outlook. And if you think about that, in an Outlook event, you know, you have to attach the BEO. You have to attach the room setup schematic. There's details in the body of the event. So the number one challenge that we heard around that is, when I make a change, how do I know that the person that's supposed to receive that change is, you know, it received it, you know, it's good to go. And that kind of fail safe doesn't really exist. So thankfully, you know, we definitely released the first version of room bookings many years ago, and then 6 months later released the version 2.0 of it with some of these upgrades. And one of them was, we need to be able to make sure that these events, when we're planning them in room bookings, can travel to Outlook.
Yep.
I myself live by my Outlook calendar, so something like that I can totally understand the value of. But yeah, let's look at these poll results, and then let's jump into the software a little bit to talk about how we're managing these things. 61% of the audience is using Outlook. Yeah, it's incredible how often we run into that as the scenario. So yeah, obviously you guys are not alone. 22% using Roombooks in the WorxHub, and then 17% it's on that marketing.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I assumed it would be north of 50% for Outlook, so that sounds about right.
Yeah.
But yeah, let me get to the program. I'll show you just a few highlights of how we would do it a little bit differently, and then we should have enough time for some Q&A at the end if we want to circle back to some of these questions. All right, so within room bookings, again, this is a separate module that's set out apart from maintenance. it would leverage the same type of structure as far as, you've got locations and you've got, residents and things already set up in the system. We can add them to events. But again, if you're used to Outlook, it's probably because you can pull up a calendar. So let's jump to that. So in my instance, I've got a bunch of different bookable rooms. Again, you could, if you're using the maintenance app, you could just go through and say, yep, that one's bookable, that one's bookable. And in that scenario, you can start to lay out what events are happening and what locations, right? And if again, you think about the lead foot for a lot of these are the resident-based activities, but we could also include staff meetings. We can include guest suites. We talked to a site that was doing those outdoor spaces, right, Wes? They were doing like fire pits and things, right? Resident facing, but kind of outdoor sections where you would only have a certain contingent of residents that would sort of own that spot for an hour or two, which I loved. I don't think that's going away either, those outdoor spaces. So we can include those in here. Now, once we've got them identified, basically goal is we're trying to avoid those double bookings. That's first and foremost. But with some of these things, you can see there's kind of that darkly shaded area which represents the event, and then those lightly shaded areas before and after. Those are those places where we've said we've got some type of setup, tear down, cleaning, where we've got to make sure that we're not putting two events too close to one another, right? Or to this point of what we're talking about is, like, if this is an Outlook event and I move it, it updates the Outlook thing, but does that necessarily update the maintenance team, the housekeeping team, the food and beverage team? Maybe, maybe not. Within this, because they're created as work orders, if we take one of these events and we slide them to another location, it will drag over the work orders with it. Meaning as soon as I do that, Wes gets an email, hey, you've got an updated work order, and he's able to look at it and say, okay, looks like they changed rooms, so I'm not going to go and set up the wrong room, right? Because these events are integrated in with every other application, for us, it's us just talking to ourselves in other places. So the maintenance team has a ticket that's 30 minutes out from the start of the event to go through and bring in 50 extra chairs. Housekeeping's got a ticket to go through and do the cleanup, get the chairs back to their normal positions. And then you can't forget the food and beverage. So you've got donuts and coffee and all these great things. You can leverage sort of a template-based system to go through and make sure that if there is some type of incorporation of food and beverage for these events, which many of them do, you've got a really sort of smooth way to get those added on and to keep that team updated as well, right? So a lot of teams just working in concert, because ultimately if any of these balls get dropped, usually it's the resident that's going to suffer a bit. It's someone that's going to be upset that they showed up to the wrong place, or there wasn't enough chairs, or we're still waiting on food and beverage because they had a delay for one reason or another. We really want to make sure these things are getting crossed off and being updated along the way. And there's some other parts baked in, like what we've talked about as far as attendance tracking to add residents to this. We can do billings, just like we talked about with other modules. We can bill these out, make sure that if you're incurring some type of charges, you can relay those back to the resident or to maybe the sales and marketing team who likes to order tons of food for all of the marketing events.
Well, even with respect to one of the themes of today's webinar, which is we're hopefully in many cases finding additional areas of revenue streams if we can, and external events are a really, really great source of that. Hopefully when we get back to the place where we're ready to do this on a pre-pandemic level, things like the Rotary Luncheon, things like book out for a wedding. You guys have these beautiful campuses, like put it up to the community, and it serves not only as a way to showcase, but also as a revenue source. And this is the way that you could really, really manage that very effectively back and forth with the accounting system.
Yeah.
Well, we're about 10 minutes of. I hate to say that we planned that, it just kind of worked out. But I'm glad that we have 10 minutes left for our Q&A, because it looks like we've gotten some pretty serious engagement in the QA and the chat box, which is awesome. And we're really appreciative of that. Now, Katie, I forget how we were going to run this. I don't know that we have time to probably answer all these. Between Taylor and Katie, did you guys pick out some that we should touch on, or should we just start to go through the list?
With Taylor's help, we've identified a couple of questions. So Taylor, if you want to jump in on some of the ones that you saw.
Yeah, so a couple of really good questions. I had one question from Bob, and Bob asked a couple of really great questions, asking about whether or not you needed to create, or in talking about billing for a resident service, would you create a PO for that work order through our system? So how would you handle that?
So you really wouldn't need to actually create a PO for it. The way our system is set up, it's just going to identify those billable services, and then you associate the rate and what that cost will be, and then the call to action is really to export those charges and send to like your finance team, your accounts payable, in terms of what is going to be put in their bill. So ours wouldn't be necessarily the source for the PO. But we could track what it should be in your charge or your POS system.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Pat.
Yeah.
Had another question. Are we working on API with point click care?
Yeah, that was one that I wanted to talk about a little bit. Unfortunately, I can't say too much about that. But good news is coming. That answers your question. Yeah. Next.
Another question for Wes. How do I add another department?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's another one I wanted to touch on too. So it kind of depends what you mean. So adding another department could mean as much as adding an entirely new, and then Pat, if you want to jump back to the software to articulate this visually a little bit, sure, that'd be helpful. Adding another department could be as complex as adding a whole nother one of these tabs, right? And I'd say complex, but it's actually pretty easy. If you think about adding one of these tabs, if it makes sense to do it, the question you want to ask yourself is, does this department have enough of a task management workload, enough of a volume of tasks that they need a digital way to manage those tasks? If that's the case, the TheWorxHub's probably an okay place to do it. We have a lot of really unique scenarios of people creating custom apps for departments for that exact reason. So that's one way to do it. Another way, because I think you may have asked that question during the QA portion of it, a way that we can alert other departments that aren't traditionally in the TheWorxHub of things that need to get done is through this alerts button. It's like a work order. When you're going through a survey, and pass fail on one of these fails, it'll prompt you to do a corrective action for this parking lot. Work request, that's going to go to someone who's in the system. That's going to be a ticket, right? But if they're not, an alert for another service area is the way that you're going to do that, and still just as trackable, but you don't have to, have everybody being someone in the TheWorxHub who's got like a technician access can receive and complete work. So hopefully between one of those two ways, that answers your question.
Excellent.
If nothing else, give your account rep a call or your support person, and, give them the scenario that you're thinking about, and they can help you think it through.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Ed asked a question, for billable work, is there a way to list out billable options for residents through either the resident portal or the TheWorxHub that can be picked up and addressed? I would lean towards using templates in the TheWorxHub to address the billable services, so that if for additional laundry services or floor care, Any of those additional services can be set up as a template with those billable options attached to the template. And even in advance, you can create an outward-facing menu of those billable options so that there's full transparency of those set rates and what services will be included in that.
Agreed. Well put.
We got a couple of good questions here at the bottom of the QA about room bookings. There's no catering app in the TheWorxHub, so how do you get the info? How do they get the info that they need? There's a space in the room booking itself to make catering work orders, and that would require them being set up in the system a little bit so they can receive that stuff. What happens if I have a large room that can be split into 2 small rooms? That's a really common scenario. We've got a way in the system that we can alleviate that. Probably easier to show than it is to talk about. What do you think about that one, Pat?
Yes, I would agree. So let's do that. So if you can see from my example, again, in the room bookings module, I've got a theater here. If I pop up the filter, I've got an A side and a B side. So in that scenario, if I booked this one right here, it would block off these other 2. And then in reverse, if I did just one of the sections, like the A side, it would only block half of it. So you can split it where it makes sense. And for your bigger areas, that was a client suggestion because that was so common. So we can absolutely accommodate that.
One question, do I have to own housekeeping to purchase QA and surveys? No. They can be purchased separately. Sorry, Pat, did I cut you off? Were you done?
No, you're fine. Nope, you're good. No, you're good.
Okay. We've got some other ones, some other questions that we can knock out. If you, yeah.
There was a good question. Can we set up a QA questionnaire to send to a resident automatically after a service was provided to match the expected delivered quality and customer service?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a good call out. I didn't show this one before. That QA survey inspection app, beyond just doing like staff evaluating staff, you can actually have these triggered out and go to a resident and kind of solicit some of their feedback. It's great that work's getting done fast, but we also want quality. So you could create custom questions, custom rating scales. And again, this becomes information that you could run reports on too. We're getting a ton of work done, but a lot of our team is leaving unclean work areas. So maybe that's something we want to do some in-service training around. So yeah, we can absolutely send those out to residents. Sure.
Excellent. One last question. If you have maintenance but not housekeeping, can you still coordinate somehow with housekeeping through room bookings? An easy solution there I would take would be to grant a couple of people who are responsible for setups and teardowns access to the maintenance module. You can set them up in a custom user role that just gives them access to work that's assigned to them. So they're only getting what they need and what they're assigned to. So you can kind of keep that centralized through a single module if you want to. If you see that volume of work ticking up, that might be when it's time to explore the actual whole housekeeping module.
Yeah, that's exactly how I was going to answer that.
Yep, spot on. Like if this housekeeping module is running here, it'll show all of like the event cleans. But again, it's if you're seeing this creep up a ton, yeah, you're going to want to have kind of a built out application for this.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Cool.
All right at time. Look at that.
No. How did that happen?
Got me.
Good stuff. All right, guys. Well, appreciate y'all joining us today. If you have any questions, here's how you get in touch with us. We love to answer any sort of questions y'all have. Especially, if you do want to do a deeper dive into one of these things and see if it's a good fit for y'all or not, we're happy to do that. Let us know.
Was there a poll question we had lined up for the end, or
That's us.
That's it.
Thank you, Russ and Pat and Taylor,
Yeah.
for an awesome presentation today. And thanks everybody so much for joining. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Appreciate y'all coming on.
Have a good one.
Good rest of the
See
day.
you, everybody.